I've heard it called by different names, usually something like celebrity sex list or skip list. This topic has come up often enough over the past few years that I'm beginning to think that a significant number of married couples have discussed it. When Maggie sheepishly admitted that evening that I was on her list, I was no longer surprised. The truth is that this has happened before. I instantly recognized her type. It wasn't difficult. Those of us who live in Los Angeles, especially in Hollywood, recognize outsiders easily. Living in a tourist mecca, you quickly learn to distinguish between those who live and work in the city and those who just come to visit. It was obvious that they were here for the first time. Maggie and Craig. I turned on my bar stool after someone nervously tapped me on the shoulder and gave the man a wide, inviting smile that should have calmed him down. This smile is literally programmed into me by years of interaction with the public and the media. The usual, "Oh my God, it's really you." My standard shy smile and disarming shrug. I practiced these reactions almost daily. Real Angelinos usually leave you alone. There are so many recognizable faces in this city that on any given day of the week, you are almost guaranteed to run into one of the celebrities. But if you find yourself in the bustling arteries of Hollywood Sunset Boulevard, Santa Monica, or Hollywood Boulevard, you open yourself up to crowds of tourists and much more public attention. I want to use the term celebrity very carefully. I can talk to a guy in his 20s at the gym, and to him I'm probably no different than a bank clerk or a lawyer. However, for women between the ages of 30 and 40, I am becoming quite recognizable. The show I starred in aired for 5 seasons. The final took place 3 years ago. By this point, I was desperate to leave. I already knew that I was stuck in one image. I was no longer Matt Knoll, the actor. I was Matt Knoll as Blake. Between seasons, I went to audition for films, but my agent kept offering me the same thing. It's all Blake again. I understood that if I wanted to build a long career in this city, then I needed to stop being associated with this character as quickly as possible. Luckily, we had a good showrunner and a team that knew when to stop. The announcement that the 5th season would be the last caused an uproar among the public. But I was glad. It seemed like the right time. After the series ended, I acted in 2 independent films, and I think my work was well received. Along the way, I became friends with a respected director who often joked that he would never cast me in his films, but still helped me learn. Thanks to his guidance, I became a pretty good director, and over the past year, I have directed several episodes of quality television series. I was as proud of this work as I was of my acting career. Our network signed new contracts with the actors after the 3rd season. Considering the popularity of the show, I should be considered more than handsomely rewarded. Being smart with money gave me a significant amount of time and freedom to pursue career goals without having to grab any paying job. For this, I was incredibly grateful to Blake. Our show was released on a streaming service, which allowed it to be more explicit than the usual primetime projects. For some reason, women adored my character, Blake. He was a guy from New Jersey who moved to Los Angeles and owned a plant store. I was part of the main cast of 10 people, but it was me and a couple of other characters that really caught the audience's attention. The show followed the lives of all the characters, and by the 3rd season, it became quite successful. Predictably, I had a real romantic relationship with one of the actresses in the series, which temporarily added even more attention to my personality. Fortunately, over time the hype has died down a bit. Although I was still recognizable, people no longer took sneaky photos of me on the street like they had done a few years ago. Growing up on a real farm in the Midwest instilled in me a strong sense of values. Despite all the temptations of Hollywood, I avoided dangerous parties and the dark side of this industry, which swallowed up many of my friends. However, I lived in Los Angeles, was wealthy, and could sometimes afford things that most people couldn't afford. My financial advisor strongly recommended that I avoid marriage at all costs. It seemed cruel, but in a city like this, I figured he spoke from what he saw. Fortunately, I was not close to getting married yet, or even a serious relationship. Therefore, I was always happy to give my wide smile when an attractive woman touched me on the shoulder. As I already mentioned, here you learn to understand people quite quickly. Maggie was too easy to figure out. The words were flying out of her mouth, worried, embarrassed, worried that she had disturbed me. I immediately recognized the Midwest native. Damn it, I grew up like this myself. She and her husband Craig, 10 feet away from us at the bar. On vacation, first time in Hollywood. Her dress gave her away too. Evening attire for a place like Delaney's. Angelinos who visit Delaney's know how to look like $1,000,000 without trying at all. She had wavy blonde hair that went just below her shoulders. Classic sweet girl. She probably wore more makeup than usual because of the atmosphere around her. She and her husband were, by my estimates, about 35. Craig looked elegant, dark jeans and a blue-gray shirt. He was slim, fit, and seemed like a pretty good-looking guy. Maggie's dress was black and very tight. The row of silver buttons running from the belly to the chest looked a little too flashy, but probably seemed fashionable in their city. As she talked about ordinary things, I took a moment to admire the impressive figure that her dress emphasized. She was definitely a woman of my taste. She had a figure. By Hollywood's ruthless standards of absolute thinness, she would probably be considered large. I've dated my fair share of Hollywood girls, and aside from not finding super thin attractive at all, I've also noticed that being obsessed with the anemic Hollywood lifestyle usually makes these women quite boring in bed. Therefore, when I had the opportunity to spend the night with women whom I myself found attractive, I did not mind a little pleasure. Maggie was the epitome of everything I loved. Nice shapes, hips, beautiful round butt, and large, seemingly natural breasts. I admit, it may seem trivial to sleep with women who adore you for the role you played on television. But given what Hollywood usually offered me, I didn't mind taking advantage of the occasional attention from non-lay women who were a little dazzled by my fame. They usually suited my taste better. If they were excited about the idea of sleeping with the guy who played Blake, who am I to deny them that opportunity? Maggie's wide-eyed delight at meeting me in person was palpable. While I coyly brushed off her compliments about the show, I asked her where she was from. I wasn't particularly surprised when she answered, "From Columbus." Convinced that she was simply excited by the meeting, and not strange and definitely very attractive, I pointed to a couple of empty bar stools and invited her and her husband to join me. Her look of disbelief lasted a few seconds before she turned and hurriedly waved her hand at her husband. We moved 2 more chairs to form a triangle, and her husband, Craig, sauntered over to us. He was nice, but definitely much less outgoing than Maggie. I learned that they came to Los Angeles for the first time in their lives. Maggie worked as an insurance salesman, which is not surprising. She had a natural gift of persuasion and enough confidence to be the first to approach me. Craig worked in the management of a Mercedes dealership. Like most people, Maggie had a few questions about the show. I have a few standard stories that I save for conversations like this. Some behind-the-scenes details about the show. How we were almost closed after the first season. A famous actress who almost played the main role, but was replaced at the last moment. Maggie seemed to hang on every word. Gradually, I turned the conversation back to them. They said that they had been in Los Angeles for almost a week. We did the standard things, visited Universal Studios, the Walk of Fame, went to a Lakers game. We spent a couple of days on the beach. I smiled to myself. They were there twice a week. I haven't been there twice in a year. The hotel they stayed at was good. A classic 20-story building on Sunset that a major chain bought and renovated about 5 years ago. They mentioned several restaurants they had visited on Sunset. Again, standard seats. Beautiful, but clearly designed for tourists. They said they found Delaney's bar by asking the hotel concierge to recommend a place where the locals hang out. This was one of my favorite bars for exactly this reason. Mostly only locals. Quiet, dark, and tucked away on Las Palmas near Yucca. I realized that they both drank a glass of wine during dinner. Maggie was now drinking white, and Craig chose Miller. They were easy to talk to, and I enjoyed their company. Maggie admitted that she was a little overwhelmed by all the glitz and glamour of Los Angeles. She laughed about how beautiful she thought all the girls were and admitted that she felt uncomfortable at the beach and hotel pool in her one-piece swimsuit as opposed to the small bikinis she said others preferred. I assured her that not all of Los Angeles is window dressing and that the best places in the city are those that only locals know. I told them I would make a list of places for them to visit next time. Craig thanked me but laughed, saying that after their tiring week, he felt they were probably more Florida people than California people. Maggie playfully hit him on the shoulder and, leaning forward, continued confidentially, giving me a tempting look at her cleavage. "He's just offended that you're on my list," she laughed sheepishly. "And I actually met you," she added with a laugh. I pretended not to understand anything and raised an eyebrow. "A list?" Of course, I guessed what she was talking about, but I wanted her to explain everything herself. "Well, Maggie quickly responded, now a little embarrassed. "Like a list of celebrities with whom you can." She hesitated. I let her be silent. "Well, every partner has a list of 5 celebrities with whom they have the right to." "Oh, how would you know?" she reproached herself, sitting up straight, now all red as a lobster. "You're a celebrity yourself. Why do you need some kind of list?" "A list of people you could," I drawled, pushing her to explain, leaning forward slightly. She cleared her throat, glanced briefly at Craig, who looked clearly unhappy, and, leaning back, finally exhaled. "Have sex," she said. "No consequences." "Oh," I exclaimed in surprise. "It's just a joke, of course," Maggie quickly retorted, patting her husband on the leg soothingly. "These should be people you would never meet in reality." I nodded slowly, as if I was just beginning to understand. To lighten the mood a little, I thought for a moment. "So, if I'm on your list, Maggie, who else is on it?" I teased. "I need to understand who my competition is." Luckily, they both laughed. I wasn't surprised by her answers, a pretty standard choice. Chris Pratt, Nick Jonas, both Hemsworth brothers. "Everyone, unfortunately, earns much more than me," I noted to myself. "I'm pretty sure the Hemsworth brothers don't work in duets, so I wouldn't count on it too much," I added thoughtfully, getting more laughs from both of them. "Well, if this is Maggie's list, then who's on your list, Craig?" I asked. He seemed surprised by the change in focus, but eventually gave in. After some coaxing from Maggie, he muttered a few exclusively famous movie stars and also mentioned a couple of cute girls from TV shows. I laughed when he said Shoshana. "Oh, Craig, you're in luck. I know her." He looked at me in surprise. "We used to live on the same street," I explained. "So you still have a chance." He blushed in response. I took my iPhone and pretended to dial a number. "We'll just take you to her house and Maggie, and I will meet you tomorrow. How do you like that?" He laughed a little awkwardly, but I noticed Maggie fiddling with the dress at the neckline, having undone one of the many buttons on the front. We laughed and chatted for another 15 minutes. I finished my drink and began to make slight movements, hinting that I was about to leave. Maggie seemed to catch on quickly and asked if I would stay for one more drink. "We've never interacted with a real celebrity before," she exclaimed. I pretended to check the time on my watch. In fact, I was in no hurry. I just stopped by Delaney's for a drink and said hi to Damon, the bartender I sometimes play guitar with. "Okay, just one," I agreed. Maggie quickly sent Craig to the bar for another round of drinks. I turned my bar stool so I was looking directly at her. Now we are left alone. "So, a list for sex, huh?" I smiled widely, teasing her. She blushed again, but I put a calming hand on her knee. "Believe me, this is an absolute compliment. It's a great honor for me." "God, how embarrassing. I can't believe I admitted this to you," she moaned, covering her face with her hand, and then looked at me between her fingers. "As if you would ever." I patted her on the leg. "Can I share a secret with you?" I asked softly. She nodded curiously, finally removing her hand from her face. I leaned closer and said quietly, "Just to clarify this point, you are absolutely my type. You are funny, beautiful, and very sexy. In other circumstances, I would. I paused for a second, giving her time to process what I had said, and noticed how an embarrassed smile began to appear on her face. And about that one-piece swimsuit. I'm sure you look damn incredible in it. I lightly tugged at the hem of her dress, just above the knee. Actually, I've been thinking about this ever since you tapped me on the shoulder. I winked at her with a mischievous smile and leaned back in my chair towards the bar. She paused for a moment, thinking. Then she leaned towards me again, and I also leaned forward. "Purple," she whispered with a smile. We both settled back into a more natural position as Craig returned, balancing 3 drinks in his hands. This lifestyle that I led was something of an endless routine, a vicious circle. In this circle, women came and went, and the relationships never became more than just fleeting episodes. At some point, I realized that my life is a series of the same scenarios, replacing each other, where faces change, but the process itself remains unchanged. I learned to clearly distinguish between those who wanted more meetings, photographs, fame associated with my name. These people expected continuation from me, some kind of development, but I knew very well that I would never be able to give them this. More often than not, such moments left neither a mark on my life nor a meaningful mark on theirs. These were moments spent in company that didn't really matter. At times it felt like a kind of game. I watched women who tried to look relaxed and independent, although their eyes showed real delight and excitement at being next to me. Sometimes I even felt like some kind of trophy, some kind of achievement they could add to their imaginary list of victories. But I didn't mind. This suited everyone, them and me. There were, of course, exceptions. There were women who surprised me, those who didn't try to seem like someone they weren't. They were just being themselves, and it seemed like a refreshing contrast to the overall picture. Such women could carry on a conversation about anything except my series or my popularity. They didn't ask for a selfie or try to show themselves off at social events where I could often be found. They didn't look at me as a celebrity, as a dream to be achieved. They perceived me as an ordinary person, and this made them especially attractive. However, such meetings were rare, almost random, and, as a rule, did not last more than one evening. These were pleasant exceptions, but I knew that they would always remain only short bursts in my life. The feeling of simplicity, sincerity, and lack of pressure from such women was something I really liked, but I was well aware that I was not ready or able to make it something permanent. And despite the fact that such moments were rare, I still continued to look for them among the general mass. Look for something more real than fleeting encounters devoid of depth and meaning. But I still spent most of my time in the usual routine, where relationships remained superficial and fleeting. Hollywood, with all its glamour, with its bright lights and eternal shows, only intensified this feeling. Here, everything seemed to be an illusion, everything seemed temporary. People around me measured success by the number of subscribers, photos on social networks, but not by the depth of their relationships. I knew that sooner or later this lifestyle would exhaust itself, that the moment will come when I want something more meaningful and real. But until that happened, I was happy with what I had. I lived in a world where everything comes easily and goes just as easily. In a world where connections between people could be warm, but not deep. In a world where affection was something unnecessary and emotional involvement was considered weakness. As long as this world suited me, I was ready to continue to exist in it, knowing that one day all this would have to change. But I still didn't know when and how this would happen. Speaking of boyfriends and husbands, this has been an interesting topic that I have only begun to study in the last few years. The whole story began unexpectedly, like many strange moments in life. It all started with that same husband. I was in Park City at the Sundance Film Festival promoting an independent film I starred in. The atmosphere was lively. People were rushing back and forth, looking for their acquaintances, discussing the latest premieres, and sharing their impressions. It was announced that I would take part in a panel discussion, a question and answer session, and then an evening event where guests could relax and network in an informal setting. It was all part of the festival's magic, bringing filmmakers and audiences closer together. Towards the middle of the evening, returning from the bar with a glass of red wine, I suddenly noticed a man confidently walking towards me. He looked quite pleasant, an ordinary guy in a stylish jacket, smiling and clearly a little nervous. Walking closer, he extended his hand and introduced himself, Rick. We exchanged standard pleasantries. He said that he was glad to meet, and that he had seen all my films, starting with one very old one, which, as it seemed to me, everyone had long forgotten. It was nice, of course. We chatted for a few minutes, and he mentioned that he had an unusual request. I remember him pointing to a quiet corner, and although my first thought was one of slight suspicion after all, men rarely approached me with such intentions, and his proposal sounded mysterious. Something in his manner seemed sincere to me. We were surrounded by people, and this had its own sense of security. Besides, several of my friends were nearby, so despite the strangeness of the situation, I agreed to move away from the crowd a little. We found ourselves in a quieter corner, where the music was no longer deafening and the light was softer. Rick was clearly nervous. He took a deep breath, took a long sip of wine, as if gathering his courage before an important confession, and finally squeezed out, "Sorry, I know this sounds unusual, but—" He paused, as if searching for words. "Would you like to sleep with my wife?" It is clear that at that moment I did not know at all how to react to this. Time seemed to stand still. My first thought is some kind of prank. Maybe there were cameras hiding somewhere. Maybe he just wanted to get a reaction from me. But his eyes, calm, a little tired, but honest, said that he was not joking. There was an awkward pause, during which I just looked at him, trying to understand what was happening. Without waiting for my answer, Rick began to speak faster, as if he was afraid that I would simply turn around and leave. He said his wife is my biggest fan, that she always dreamed of meeting me and often fantasized about me in bed. He insisted that she was a very beautiful, smart, wonderful woman, and that for him it would be a special gift for her. It seemed that this request was not just a fantasy or a whim, but something more personal and important to both of them. He seemed to be looking for understanding, looking for some kind of deep recognition of his desires, and there was hope in his eyes. I was still silent, and Rick, seeing my confusion, added, "I understand that this is strange, and if you say no, I will understand. She just loves you so much, and I would like to make her happy for at least one night." To be honest, I didn't know what to say. It was one of those moments when the world around you seems to narrow down to one point. Your interlocutor and you, and all the conversations and music become background noise. Rick waited, and I tried to sort out my thoughts and feelings. On the one hand, it was so incredible that I even wanted to laugh. On the other hand, I saw this as a sincere request, which was dictated not only by love, but also by some deep, touching understanding of each other, which they apparently achieved as a couple. Trying to understand why, as her husband, he would make such a proposal, I had difficulty asking him this question. It was hard for me to believe that he was actually okay with this. "Listen, I like to see her happy and excited," he admitted. "Yes, she is very attractive, but I have no illusions that she will give up her life in Denver and go with you. If it ever has to happen, I'd rather it be you than someone else." I looked at him curiously. His honesty was unusual. "Why don't you come over and meet her? She's sitting at that table. If you want, I won't interfere. You can do whatever you want if she likes it. I'll probably just watch." The strangeness of his approach aroused my interest, and I agreed to go to the table, but without guarantees of anything more than just saying hello. He was right. Candace was beautiful. Given the overtly sexual nature of the proposal, I expected her to be hypersexual and provocative in some way. She turned out to be the complete opposite. Denver housewife. Beautiful smile. I'm a little nervous. She was wearing tight leggings and an oversized wool sweater, which was appropriate for the cold weather. Even in a sweater, it was clear that she had attractive curves. Her nervousness continued throughout the evening. I imagined that the weight of what they were planning was too much for her. She seemed a little embarrassed, and even after a few drinks together, she felt uncomfortable in my presence. Back at their room, she was stiff as I started kissing her and taking off her clothes. It took many quiet compliments about her body and beauty for her to finally relax. She definitely wasn't the most passionate lover I've ever been with. However, when she finally entered the process, it was clear that she was trying to make a good impression. She was quiet but persistent, and I found myself savoring the moment, standing by the bed in their hotel room as she deliberately pleasured me while her husband watched from a chair a few feet away. The fact that I was the one getting pleasure from her, and not him, gave me a strange feeling of excitement and power. Later, as I was thrusting into Candace, I turned around and saw Rick stand up and begin to take off his pants. He seemed to be unable to hold back any longer and, freed from his underwear, began to satisfy himself. It took a lot of effort for Candace to relax and feel comfortable. She was clearly nervous and a little embarrassed to openly show passion in front of her husband. But knowing how important a trusting atmosphere is, I tried to be sensitive and maintain it. Gradually, Candace became more relaxed and was able to fully enjoy the moment. When she felt more confident, everything began to go much easier. Over the next period of time, we were both able to feel the connection and intimacy that is necessary for such moments. Eventually, I noticed that her husband, Rick, was watching us from a chair nearby. He looked tired and seemed to be going through his emotions too. Later, reflecting on this evening, I felt that this experience was significant for all of us. He allowed everyone to experience something new and understand their limits. I knew Rick and Candace had a lot to discuss and process, so when we finished, I expressed my gratitude and admiration. I hope that for Candace, this experience was a fantasy come true and that it brought her joy. Then I quickly left them. After accepting a beer from Craig, I re-entered our conversation. I watched Maggie with interest. She was clearly a little excited about our flirting and the fact that I had opened the door for her to an opportunity that, if she wanted, could become a reality. Initially, I doubted how she would take my proposal, but as I watched Maggie play with another button at the neckline of her dress, I smiled internally. My episode with Rick and Candace definitely left a mark. It was quite exciting, and since then I have changed my attitude towards dating women. Just because they were in a relationship no longer automatically rejected them as potential partners. I realized that I had probably been missing signs from women over the years, under the impression that those with men were only communicating with me out of friendship. Over the next few years, I had 3 more experiences with couples, and each one was as exciting as the first with Rick and Candace. These moments brought new shades into my life and opened up unknown facets of human relationships for me. The first of these episodes happened unexpectedly. I met a woman in a hotel bar where I was staying during a short business trip. She turned out to be charming and confident. She had an irresistible, almost magnetic look. We chatted for several hours, and she directly suggested continuing the evening in her room. I already realized then that the situation could be more complicated than it seemed at first glance, but I did not ask unnecessary questions. When we got to her hotel room, it turned out that her husband was waiting downstairs in the lobby bar at that time. He knew what was going on and, according to her, even approved of it. We spent the night together, feeling the pressure of someone else waiting, perhaps even watching. This added spice to everything that was happening, turning our meeting into an exciting experiment. Another case was no less interesting. I met an English woman in one of the nightclubs in the city. She immediately attracted my attention with her relaxed behavior and sparkling energy. Her hair glowed in the dim light, and her laughter sounded so loud that you wanted to listen to it. We danced, laughed, and flirted all evening until she suggested we go up to their room at the W Hotel. She said her husband would join us later. Once we were in the room, she insistently asked that her husband watch us. It turned out that it was not easy for him to accept this situation, but it was clear that it was important to her. She pressed me against the panoramic window, as if she wanted to show the whole world her desire. The night city shone behind the glass, and her husband stood in the dimness of the room, holding back his emotions. It was a game in which we all participated, and each of its sides was full of tension and hidden fire. I sensed that he was experiencing a mixture of jealousy, arousal, and confusion, but his wife made it clear that she intended to sleep with me, regardless of his opinion. This added spice to what was happening, and this night remained in my memory as one of the most unusual and risky. Another story happened during the filming of an episode that I directed. There was a woman working on the site who immediately attracted my attention with her professionalism and charisma. She was not only talented, but also incredibly beautiful, with that special sparkle in her eyes that happens to people who know what they want from life. We often communicated on the set, and after a while there was a spark between us that was impossible not to notice. One day after work, she suggested meeting at their temporary home. She and her husband were renting an apartment in the Oakwoods during filming. It turned out that she and her husband had an agreement. She could sleep with other men, and he knew about it and accepted it as part of their relationship. I visited them, and we spent the evening enjoying wine and conversation, and then were alone. We met several times, and each time there was something both calm and passionate in these meetings. She said that her relationship with her husband was built on absolute trust and freedom of choice, and it was important for her to feel that her desires could be realized without judgment. This experience was new and inspiring for me. It showed how diverse and deep human relationships can be if they are built on mutual understanding and respect for each other. The first night I picked her up from her apartment, and we went out for drinks before coming back to my place. She FaceTimed her husband with her top off and told him clearly what she was going to do with me for the next hour. The second time we went to her place, she made my husband sit in the living room and listen to me having sex with her in the bedroom. For the last time, before she left for the East, she allowed him to watch. Poor guy. But wow, just realizing the power imbalance in a relationship like this, where you're having a sexual relationship with a woman and her partner knows about it or has to put up with it, was very intoxicating and much more exciting than just casual relationships. By that time, I already had a clear understanding of how to read couples and determine the interest of a woman in a relationship. And that evening, I knew it was time to let things take their course and see what would happen. I asked Maggie and Craig to excuse me for a moment. I noticed one of my friends enter the bar, and this gave me the perfect opportunity to give them some privacy for a few minutes. As I greeted Billy in another part of the bar, I continued to watch them. They were talking animatedly, but it didn't seem tense. Maggie put her hand on Craig's leg. I saw her kiss him several times, leaning in convincingly. When she started looking for me, I patted my friend on the back and headed back to them. As I sat down in my chair, I noticed Maggie smile softly. To restart the conversation, I was going to tell them about Billy's great gallery, but Maggie spoke first, quietly and shyly. We were wondering, would you like to join us for another drink at our hotel? With a practiced movement, I raised an eyebrow, expressing curiosity. I met Maggie's gaze and held it for a moment, letting the silence play its part. The absence of questions and a serious look showed that I perfectly understood what was going on. After a pause, I turned my gaze to her husband. "Are you sure, Craig?" He sat motionless. It was difficult to read his reaction, but his pause was shorter than mine. I noticed him swallow and clear his throat. Then he nodded slightly and silently said, "Yes." "Okay then," I said calmly. I knew from previous experience that the next short period of time would be awkward. What was to happen had already been discussed. Both were now experiencing completely different emotions. I've learned that the best thing to do in these situations is to show confidence and take control. Now that the gears were in motion, I didn't want the wheels to fall off along the way. "Why don't I call my car service to come pick us up?" I suggested, reaching for the phone in my pocket. Although our drinks were practically untouched, they now lost all meaning. Confusion appeared on their faces as I quickly sent a message to the dispatcher. I have used this car service for many years. It existed exclusively for people like me, those who valued efficiency, and, most importantly, confidentiality. Their fleet of luxury cars served all of Hollywood, including Malibu and the coastal areas. An almost immediate response from Jessica confirmed that Jackson was nearby and could be there in less than 5 minutes. I knew him well. He often drove me, a guy of about 25 from New York with a great understanding of people. He intuitively knew when to start a conversation and when it was better to leave the client alone. Looking at Craig and Maggie, I smiled broadly and said that our car would be arriving soon. After gathering my things, I stood up and extended my hand to Maggie to help her down from the high bar stool. Her warm hand slipped into mine and squeezed tightly. She looked at me with genuine excitement. Craig, meanwhile, took his mug and began to drain its contents. Obviously, he expected that the coming evening would be better met with an additional dose of alcohol. I handed Maggie her coat and the three of us headed out. I casually waved to my friend, the bartender Damon. I visited Delaney's often and knew it well. He had seen me leave the bar with various women, but this was probably the first time I had ever taken a woman right in front of her husband. Damon smiled widely and laughed, waving back at me. "Poor thing," he whispered. Craig and Maggie were visibly surprised when Jackson's large black SUV pulled up smoothly to the curb in front of us. "Good evening, Mr. Knoll," he said affably, jumping from the driver's seat, walking around the car, and opening the back door. Given the traffic on Las Palmas, I suggested sitting first so as not to open the door on the street side. Climbing into the spacious salon, I again extended my hand to Maggie to help her climb. This time I deliberately did not move further along the long seat, leaving myself closer to the center. Craig, watching his wife climb into the car behind me, found himself in a position where there was practically no room left next to her. Jackson quickly assessed the situation. In the 20 seconds or so he stood at the curb, he intuited what was probably in store for me that evening and gave his support. With an encouraging smile, he opened the passenger door and suggested to Craig, "Why don't you sit here, sir? Best seat in the car." Craig sat down in the front seat with obvious confusion as the doors closed behind us. Maggie and I were positioned in such a way that it was difficult for Craig to see us. As the SUV pulled away from the curb, I felt Maggie move closer to me. Her warm body and soft curves pressed against my hand. I turned to her and smiled confidently. It was obvious that she was nervous, but the darkness of the back seat seemed to allow her to relax a little. When our eyes met, she gently ran her tongue over her lips and then beat them lightly. I let my gaze travel lower to her cleavage. Not hiding my interest, I noticed how Maggie slowly began to undo one button on her dress and then another. With her fingers, she carefully straightened the collar of her dress, revealing the deep valley between her breasts. Clearly, she wasn't ready for the California sun, and I smiled as I noticed how her sunburnt skin faded into the whiteness of her hidden cleavage. Jackson, meanwhile, turned on some R&B at medium volume and struck up a conversation with Craig, telling him about the interesting places we were passing by. He had the kind of inside info that can't be found in travel guides. I smiled to myself, appreciating his efforts to distract Craig. As bright neon lights flashed outside the windows as we crossed the intersection of Hollywood and La Brea, Maggie moaned softly as I leaned down and softly kissed the top of her bare breast. This was our first explicitly sexual encounter. Her right arm wrapped around my shoulder, encouraging me to continue. The drive from Delaney's to their hotel was short, and once we reached Sunset, Jackson deftly maneuvered through traffic, bringing us closer to our destination. About a block from the hotel, I removed my hand. Previously, I had been gently touching the outer edge of her underwear, but knowing that we were almost there, I chose not to go any further. Maggie became visibly upset and shifted in her seat when I pulled away. I winked at her with a mischievous smile, knowing that the most interesting things were yet to come. As Jackson pulled up to the hotel entrance, the doorman immediately approached us, opening the doors and greeting us. I thanked Jackson, and he responded politely, as always. It seemed to me that something understanding flashed in his gaze, but like all drivers of this service, he could boast of absolute discretion. Craig's eyes widened slightly as he saw his wife get out of the back seat of the car. She was clearly flushed and excited, straightening and rearranging her dress. I followed her out, and she gave me an embarrassed smile. Her large breast stuck out from the slightly unbuttoned top of her dress, and I watched with pleasure as she demurely tried to button it back up while her husband watched. Without a real view of the back seat, Craig must have been irritably trying to figure out what was happening behind him on the way out of the bar. I enjoyed it. We walked through the revolving doors and entered the spacious lobby of a luxury hotel. The spacious lobby of the hotel, where Maggie and Craig were staying, opened onto a long bar and lounge area, filled as usual with people who came to see and be seen. I casually offered my hand to Maggie, and she took it as we walked down the hall with Craig following a couple steps behind. I was used to people's attention throughout my day, and I noticed that Maggie was aroused by their recognition as we walked through the lounge area to the elevators. Considering that she was not used to such attention, I could imagine the delight she felt at being on the arm of a celebrity, apparently heading to a hotel room. The elevator bank at the back of the lobby was next to the hotel store. Maggie squeezed my hand lightly, slowing our movement, and leaned closer. "Sorry, but can I buy condoms? It's just that Craig and I are trying to have a baby, and—" I nodded in understanding, and we changed route, heading towards the store. "Maybe it's better if you don't buy them," she asked understandably, clearly concerned about what it might look like if I walked into a store with a woman on my arm to buy condoms. To be honest, I didn't care much about it. But I didn't mind when Maggie turned to Craig and asked him to do it. I felt that she asked him this purely for practical reasons. However, I couldn't help but imagine how he must have felt at that moment. Your wife asking you to buy condoms for another man who is going to have sex with her. I gently leaned towards her. "It's probably better to buy XL. "Ooh," she exclaimed with surprise and laughter. From the moment we got into the car on the way to the hotel, Craig's confident demeanor gradually gave way to an expression of shock. The reality of what was happening seemed to wash over him, and my request for large condoms clearly did not add to his confidence. While Maggie and I waited, he walked into the small glass store, found what he was looking for, and headed to the cash register. Maggie squeezed my hand as she watched Craig take out his wallet and pay for the condoms he wouldn't use. I looked at Maggie. She was clearly having fun watching him. Craig soon returned, silently holding a small brown paper bag in his hand. We took the elevator up with another group of 4 people. Maggie held my hand tightly as the elevator moved up, and we finally got off on the 11th floor. When we entered their room, I recognized the layout. It was a 1-bedroom suite. The windows overlooked the sunset and the sparkling lights of Los Angeles at night. At the end of the open living room were French doors leading to the bedroom and adjoining bathroom. In situations like this, the first few minutes are usually awkward. However, Maggie clearly knew what she wanted and did not look embarrassed or confused. She calmly took off her coat and placed it on the chair at the table, and then turned to her husband. She kissed him for a long time and then asked him to pour wine for the 3 of us. Quickly putting away the clothes scattered around the room, she remarked with a smile, "I wasn't expecting guests." Craig pulled out a bottle of red wine and poured the first glass for his wife. I watched with a smile as Maggie drank half the glass in one gulp before setting it down on the table and walking over to me. She raised her arms and wrapped them around my shoulders, pulling me towards her for a deep kiss. Her breathing was already deep with excitement, and when I tasted the red wine on her tongue, her large breasts, tightly clinging to her dress, rose and fell on my chest. She was clearly very excited, and her passion in the kiss only fueled the anticipation of what lay ahead. I took a moment to run my hands over her body. She was exactly the type of woman I liked. Seductive. The appeal of her large breasts was obvious, but as my hands slid down to her hips, I was delighted to discover how incredible her big, round butt was. Even through the thick fabric of the dress and underwear, it was clear how elastic and full she was. Wanting to see more, I slowly broke the kiss and reached for the top buttons of her dress. Maggie watched as I unfastened the first and then the second. Gradually, her large breasts began to burst out, pushing the fabric apart. The snow-white soft cleavage became even deeper until a purple half-circle bra appeared, which, as I guessed, matched what she had slightly exposed to me earlier. The choice of lingerie was daring for a woman with such impressive breasts. The tight dress held her breasts well, but in this sexy bra, the top of her breasts burst out, as if challenging the lingerie. As the buttons began to part lower, a matching pair of panties were revealed. Silk and purple, they hugged her hips tightly and were cut high on her hips. The dress soon fell at her feet and Maggie stepped out of it. I leaned over again, and for the next few minutes we spent in a passionate embrace, kissing and caressing each other while she unbuttoned the buttons on my shirt. Maggie breathed deeply, and soon my shirt was on the floor next to her dress. Maggie looked at me with a slight smile, slightly embarrassed, but clearly excited. We were in a hotel room, bathed in the soft light of the city stretching outside the window. She stood in front of me, and her eyes expressed both desire and expectation. I moved closer to her, placing my hands on her waist and pulling her slightly closer. We began to exchange kisses, which started out cautiously but became deeper and deeper with each passing second. I felt her hands slide onto my shoulders, and this gave the moment even more intimacy. Slowly, I ran my hand down her back, feeling her relax. I ran my hand through her hair, lightly running my fingers through it. "Are you okay?" I asked, looking into her eyes. She turned to me, smiling, and nodded slightly. "It was an unforgettable evening," she said, her voice quiet but confident. "I feel like I'm in another world." I didn't respond with words, instead I just touched her cheek. The gentle gesture brought another warm smile to her face. We lay there for a while longer before she propped herself up on her elbow to look at me. Then we went to the bathroom. We returned to the bedroom when Craig, who had been sitting calmly in a chair with a glass of wine, looked up at us. His gaze was both curious and intense, but not repelling. He seemed ready to watch, but was still a little hesitant. Maggie, noticing this, came up to him, placing her hand on his shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Craig nodded, his lips curling into a faint smile. "Yeah, it's just a little unusual." Maggie sat down next to him and, taking his hand, looked into his eyes. "If you feel uncomfortable, just tell me, okay?" He nodded slowly and then turned his gaze to me, as if giving silent consent. There was a moment of silence in the room, and I realized that it was important to move slowly so that everyone felt comfortable. Maggie pulled my hand, leading me back to the bed. Her confidence and ease added to the atmosphere of calm. As we settled into bed, Craig continued to sit in the chair, watching us. There was a mixture of admiration and surprise in his eyes, but without signs of jealousy. I placed my hands on Maggie's shoulders, gently running my fingers over her skin, and she relaxed, trusting the moment. We moved slowly, every gesture filled with sensuality and care. When my hands touched her back, she sighed softly, and her body trembled from the touch. Craig, sitting in his chair, seemed lost in thought, but his gaze never left us. He clearly enjoyed seeing Maggie enjoying the moment. Sometimes he looked away, as if pondering what was happening, but then returned to observation, smiling slightly. Maggie turned to him and extended her hand, gesturing for him to come closer. "It's okay, really," she said with a tenderness that clearly helped him relax. Craig stood up and walked over, still holding the glass of wine. He sat down on the edge of the bed, and I felt the tension in the room gradually give way to calm harmony. His presence seemed to make Maggie even more relaxed, and her smile never left her face. I focused on making Maggie feel wanted by respecting her husband's boundaries. As I slid my hand down her thigh, her eyes met Craig's, and she smiled warmly at him. It was a moment of togetherness in which no one felt like an outsider. Craig put his hand on her shoulder, stroking her gently, and it added a surprising amount of intimacy to the moment. His touch was not jealous or possessive, but rather one of support and approval. The three of us continued this moment of intimacy, taking our time and respecting each other. The atmosphere in the room was filled with trust, warmth, and sensuality, which left each of us completely satisfied with what was happening. It was something more than just a physical connection. It was a deep understanding that we are all here by consent and pleasure. Craig, having finally gotten comfortable with the situation, sat closer to us on the bed. His gaze was calm, but filled with emotion. He was clearly mesmerized by how his wife was enjoying the moment. Maggie turned to him, her face glowing with warmth. She touched his hand, as if making it clear that he was also part of this unusual evening. "Are you sure everything is fine?" she asked quietly, tilting her head slightly. Craig smiled, his face relaxing. "Yes, I just want to see you happy," he replied, his voice sincere. "You look amazing." Maggie reached out to him and kissed him tenderly, her fingers running gently over his face. It was a moment of intimacy that proved that there was still a deep connection between them, despite the unusual nature of the situation. I felt that their relationship was based on trust and love, which made this moment even more special. When Maggie turned back to me, she looked confident and relaxed, her movements smooth and sensual. Craig watched us, his hands resting lightly on the bed. He would occasionally comment quietly on how beautiful his wife was, or how he admired her freedom. I continued to gently interact with Maggie, creating an atmosphere that left room for everyone's comfort. Craig didn't look distant as he watched this. On the contrary, he seemed emotionally involved, although he remained physically aloof. His easy comments and supportive smile made it feel like he was accepting the moment as part of their shared experience. Maggie, noticing this, quietly suggested, "You can join if you want. We're all here for fun." Craig hesitated a bit, but then nodded. He clearly wasn't sure what to do, but his trust in Maggie and in what was happening outweighed his doubts. He sat closer and gently placed his hand on her shoulder, joining in our sensual play, but maintaining boundaries he was comfortable with. The evening progressed slowly as the three of us found ways to interact that were comfortable and respectful. Maggie seemed to enjoy the attention and care from both sides, and Craig gradually became more confident. This experience wasn't just about physical pleasure, it was something more. We shared with each other emotions, freedom, and trust that went beyond the usual. By morning, each of us felt not just satisfied, but as if something important had been strengthened that night. It was a moment that will be remembered as a symbol of love, understanding, and sincerity. The light of the morning sun was already breaking through the curtains when the three of us were still in the room, each immersed in our own thoughts. The atmosphere was rich with intimacy, but it did not lose its lightness. Maggie, wrapped in a soft blanket, sat between Craig and me, smiling quietly. We exchanged glances that did not require words. But then something happened that changed the course of the evening. The phone on the table next to the bed rang. Maggie slowly reached for it, her smile gradually fading when she saw the name on the screen. She turned the phone towards Craig, and his face also became serious. "This is my sister," she said, her voice shaking. Craig nodded, signaling for her to answer. "This could be important," he said quietly. Maggie accepted the call, and her expression changed as soon as she heard the voice on the other end. She listened carefully, her eyes wide. "What? When?" she asked, and then her face darkened. When she ended the call, her hand shook. "My sister, she was in an accident," she said, her voice quiet but full of worry. Craig immediately hugged her, and I felt the situation go from sensual and calm to something completely different. Maggie pulled herself together, although her eyes were full of tears. "I need to go see her," she said, turning to Craig. "We will go together," he answered confidently. Then I offered, "If necessary, I can help you with transport or something else." Maggie looked at me gratefully. "Thank you, but it's family. You've already done more for me than I could have ever expected," she said, her voice soft but full of sincerity. This unexpected twist was the highlight of the evening, reminding us all that life can be unpredictable. We quickly gathered our things, and I walked them to the elevator, where we exchanged short but warm goodbyes. At the last moment, Maggie paused, looked at me, and said, "This night was special. Thank you for everything." She smiled briefly, but there was still a trace of worry in her eyes. When the elevator doors closed, I was left standing in the corridor, feeling my emotions mixed up. It was an evening that began with a sensual adventure, but ended with a reminder of how fragile life is. The intriguing and unexpected ending left a mark on my soul, turning the night into much more than just a romantic episode. Left in the corridor, I felt a strange feeling come over me, a mixture of anxiety, concern for Maggie and her family, and at the same time a strange calmness from how everything had gone. Walking back to my room, I reflected on the events of that night until my phone suddenly vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number. "Thank you for being with us tonight. I'm sure we'll meet again. Maggie." I smiled. This message read gratitude and something else, perhaps a hint that this story was not yet completed. A few days later, I returned to my daily life. Surprisingly, I couldn't stop thinking about that night. There was something magical about her, something that touched deeper than just physical intimacy. However, everything changed one ordinary night when I received another message from Maggie. "We're in Los Angeles. My sister's doing well. We'd like to meet for dinner if you're free. Craig wants to see you too." My heart beat faster. This offer was unexpected, but I felt that I could not refuse. I answered briefly, "Of course, with pleasure." We met in a cozy restaurant in the city center. When I walked in, Maggie and Craig were already sitting at the table, both looking relaxed and happy. Maggie smiled warmly at me and Craig stood up to shake my hand. Their mutual energy seemed even stronger than that night. During dinner, the conversation was easy. We discussed various topics, laughed, and shared stories. At some point, Craig leaned towards me and, lowering his voice a little, said, "You may have noticed that Maggie and I are a bit of an unusual couple. We value openness, honesty, and the fact that each of us can seek out new experiences. The night with you, it was important to both of us." Maggie confirmed his words with a nod. "It's true. Not only did I experience something new, but I also saw a different side of Craig. It brought us closer together. And you know what? We thought maybe we should try again." I was a little surprised, although their directness was not entirely unexpected after what had happened. "You mean?" Maggie smiled. "We both want you to be a part of our lives. From time to time, not as someone permanent, but as a friend who understands us and helps us explore something new." This proposal was unexpected, but it did not sound strange. On the contrary, their sincerity and honesty made the moment natural. I thought for a moment, looking at their smiling faces. This evening seemed to open new doors to a completely different world. It all started with an unexpected turn of events. A few weeks after our dinner, I received a text from Maggie. It sounded mysterious. "There's something interesting I want to talk about. Can we meet?" We agreed to meet in a cozy cafe in the city center. When I arrived, Maggie was already waiting for me at the table, and another woman was sitting next to her. Her long dark hair, charming smile, and confident gaze immediately attracted my attention. "This is my sister, Lily," Maggie said with a small smile as I approached. "Lily, this is the same person I told you about." Lily extended her hand for a handshake. "Nice to meet you. Maggie had nothing but good things to say about you." I smiled, trying to understand where this evening was leading. We spent a couple of hours at the table, talking on a variety of topics. Lily turned out to be very smart and charismatic. Her humor was light but sharp, and there was deep confidence in her gaze. She seemed to understand perfectly well why I was here, but she was in no hurry to explain her intentions. As the evening began to end, Maggie suddenly said, "Lily wants to try something new, and we thought you were the one to help her." I was surprised, but I couldn't help but notice how Lily nodded, her face turning slightly red, but she didn't look away. "I don't want to rush things," Maggie continued. "Just think about it. We can discuss this in a more private setting." We met that same evening at their home. Craig was there, and his presence added an amazing sense of confidence. He looked as calm and accepting as he did the first night. Lily, although a little tense, felt comfortable thanks to her sister. "I'm only here because I trust them," she said when Maggie and I were alone. "And because I want to try something new. If it's uncomfortable, I'll tell you right away." The three of us started with light conversations, which helped relieve the tension. When Maggie suggested we begin, she did so with the same gentleness with which our previous meetings had been structured. Lily held her sister's hand as I walked closer. Everything happened smoothly, with respect for her boundaries. Lily gradually relaxed. Her trust in us grew every minute. Maggie played a key role in helping her sister feel confident, and Craig sat nearby, watching intently, just as it was the first night. The highlight of the evening was something completely unexpected, the moment when Lily finally completely relaxed and smiled, feeling free of all fears for the first time. She looked at her sister, then at me and said, "Thank you for letting me experience this. I didn't expect it to be so." Right. That night marked the beginning of a new level of trust and connection. Maggie, Craig, and I realized that our unusual dynamic could only be inclusive of others if everyone involved felt comfortable and happy. Lily became a part of our story, adding another layer of understanding and intimacy. After several months of quiet communication with Maggie, Craig, and Lily, I felt that our unusual adventure had become part of my past. We saw each other less and less, and life went on as usual. But one day I received an unexpected message from Lily. "We're in Los Angeles. We need to meet. It's important." I was surprised, but agreed. On the appointed day, we met in a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. Instead of the cheerful, playful Lily that I was used to seeing, in front of me was a woman with a tense expression on her face. She quickly came up to me and, without waiting for questions, said, "I am pregnant." These two words sounded like a bolt from the blue. I looked at her in bewilderment, not immediately understanding what she was leading to. "And there's a good chance it's your child," she added, avoiding my gaze. My thoughts were spinning like a whirlwind. It was an unexpected turn of events that turned everything upside down. I pulled myself together and asked her a question. "Are you sure? And what does Maggie think? And Craig?" Lily sighed, as if gathering strength. "I haven't told anyone yet. You're the first one to know. I didn't know how my sister would feel about it, or Craig, but I thought you should know." The following days were filled with tension. We decided to bring everyone together to discuss the situation. When we met at their home, the atmosphere was electric. Maggie seemed surprised, but not shocked. Craig listened attentively, his face impassive. "We knew these things could happen," he finally said, breaking the silence. "But what matters is not what happened, but what we do next." Maggie put her hand on her sister's shoulder. "Lily, this is your life. We will support you no matter what, but you have to be honest with yourself and with us." I was relieved to see that they were willing to work through the situation together. After much discussion, we came to a decision. Lily would keep the baby, and we would all be a part of his life. There was no need to accurately determine paternity. The child would become part of a large and unusual family based on love, trust, and acceptance. Years after those events, life made unexpected adjustments to our relationship. The child who became the center of our attention connected us all with a strong bond. But it was Lily who became for me something more than just part of an unusual story. We spent a lot of time together. Lily was still living with her sister and Craig, and I was visiting her and little Emma, our daughter, more and more often. A bond gradually began to form between Lily and me, which was no longer limited to taking care of the child together. We understood each other more and more, and our feelings became deeper and deeper. Maggie and Craig noticed this, and one day Maggie joked in her usual easygoing way, "Maybe it's time to make this story official, huh? Emma deserves to see her parents together." Lily and I laughed, but there was something in her eyes that made me think. This thought never left my head. I realized that I really wanted to spend my life with her. One evening, when Lily was putting Emma to bed, I stayed outside the house, waiting for her. When she came out, I handed her a small bouquet of her favorite wildflowers. "What is this?" she asked in surprise, but her eyes shone with joy. I got down on one knee. "Lily, from the moment you came into my life, everything has changed. You and Emma are the most valuable thing I have. You have made me a better person. I want to spend my whole life with you. Will you marry me?" Her eyes filled with tears, she covered her mouth with her hands, and then smiled. "Yes," she answered, her voice trembling but full of joy. The wedding was small and warm. Maggie and Craig were instrumental in organizing the celebration. Emma, dressed in a stunning white dress, was holding rings. When she ran up to us and handed them to us, everyone smiled. This day was not only the beginning of our family life, but also a symbol of how unusual circumstances can turn into something beautiful. Lily and I created our home filled with love, and throughout this time, Maggie and Craig remained our close friends and support. Now I know that even the most unexpected stories can lead to the most important thing to love and a real family. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click